Okay, I trust everybody's well on this Wednesday morning. It's a midweek webinar. It's a part two discussion we're having being led by Arthur Goldstock around accelerated change that we're going through. It's a difficult time for most people, but yet very challenging, and with challenges come opportunities and excitement as well. So today we've got a follow-up of the one we did a couple of weeks ago, and it's exciting. I hope everybody's got a cup of coffee ready. I've got mine, a large one if I might add to it. Today our speakers are Arthur Goldstock, as well as Chris and Ryan, Jonathan, sorry, from Dell. And I'll introduce the speakers a little bit more later. But before we kick off, just to say thank you again to Arthur, thank you to Dell for the contribution to these sessions. And I'd ask the audience please to make sure that we mute all microphones. In addition to that, after each speaker, we'll grant an opportunity for questions to be posted. Use the text window, please, the chat window. And after all presenters are complete, you're very welcome to post questions from a general perspective to the entire audience or the panel for that matter. So Arthur, most of you know by now, he's been with us on some events, for many events actually, and presented interesting topics around change. And I'm going to introduce Arthur now so that he can come up live. There we go. Good morning, Arthur.
Morning, everyone.
Arthur today will talk further on the accelerated change that we're going through as a planet. Arthur, all yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Feroz. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be chatting with you again. In 1 second, I'll be starting my presentation, but first I just want to give a little context. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about the new shape of the future. And what's astonishing is just how rapidly that shape keeps changing. And this really defines the acceleration that we're seeing at the moment of change, and therefore also of digital transformation, because it's digital transformation that makes it possible for organizations to cope with the change. And on that note, I'm going to share episode 2 of the new shape of the future with you. First, I'm going to share a graph that was supplied to me by the IDC. They kindly agreed to it being used. I'll be sharing some other stats from them in the course of this talk. But first, to give you a sense of the shape of the present and the near future. This is really the shape of the future. And it starts with the current response to the COVID-19 crisis, which is around business continuity. And the shape of the graph really shows also the shape of the economy and the pain that we are still facing. So many people tend to think or imagine that we are coming out of the woods now because lockdown is easing. But the reality is that the scale and rate of infection is still increasing all the time, both in South Africa and globally. And the recession is deepening all the time. So we shouldn't be confused by phases of lockdown. Perhaps a better metaphor would be the phases of Eskom's load shedding, because that tends to really tell us where we're going. But that's just coincidental. The truth is that we are facing massive recession, and that's going to have massive implications for businesses. So that means that in the next 3 to 12 months, there's going to be a massive focus on not just business continuity, but business resiliency or survival. And then once we start returning to growth, we're going to see a huge emphasis on business conducted in a digital fashion. In a way, you could define this graph as starting with the health crisis and that affecting business continuity. And then it's the wealth crisis as money dries up. But then as we start emerging from the crisis, it moves to a phase of happiness. So in a way, it's a crisis of health, wealth, and happiness. And I'll show you shortly how one can actually quantify the extent of health, wealth, and happiness. But that's the concept of existence that goes back centuries and even millennia. So from that point of view, we are actually in familiar territory. But first, I'm going to tell you a tale of three eras, how the world was seen and how digital transformation was seen. This was one of the great cliches of the digital era. TechCrunch in 2015 stated these words, which have come to be repeated probably in every second or third talk on digital transformation you've ever attended. Usually, they talk about Uber as the world's largest taxi company owning no vehicles, Facebook creating no content, and Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, having no inventory. Alibaba tends to be interchanged with Amazon, and then Airbnb, which overtook the world's hotel chains in value, actually owning no real estate of its own. But in the next 3 years, there was a realization that digital transformation on its own is not enough. And this is how TechCrunch put it in 2018. Uber is buying cars. Facebook is commissioning content. Amazon, now the world's most valuable retailer, has more than 350 stores, buying more all the time. They bought a grocery chain and opening more all the time. They're Amazon Go stores. And the world's largest hospitality provider, Airbnb, beginning to own real estate. So that seemed to be the big evolution, and some saw it as a pivot, but it wasn't really a pivot. It was simply shoring up their business models. As we saw in the previous edition of this event, Walt Disney Corporation has fallen massively behind Netflix, primarily because it has a combination of digital and physical. So this isn't a pivot. This was trying to respond to demand in the marketplace. But what happened next, and this is my own analysis of it, the world's largest taxi firm, Uber, is now delivering food. The world's biggest media company, Facebook, has an advertiser backlash. And the world's most valuable retailer, Amazon, is facing a worker backlash. Even as they are hiring tens of thousands of more people to cope with demand, there's also massive question marks around the way they treat their workers. And then Airbnb, the world's largest hospitality business, suddenly has no business at all because hospitality crashed during the big crunch of 2020. The lesson from that is we all get it wrong. Even the sharpest companies in the world, those that are the most digitally transformed, can also get it wrong. So we can't afford to be arrogant about understanding the future or preparing for the future. The reality is that it's not always obvious when we see a war between the past and the future. And I'm going to show you examples of that war from two of the crucial areas of business activity, business operations, and business continuity. And the fundamental basis for all digital business is, of course, the microchip. And in the microchip, we are seeing a war between the past and the future. And that war is defined by the share prices. And I'm going to show you a few graphs of share prices, because when you follow the money, you really also get a picture of the shape of the present and future. Now, look at Intel Corporation. Intel defines the microchip. Intel invented virtually the modern transistor and has really been the forerunner in chip development for half a century now, more than half a century, in fact. Look at their market capitalization, $258 billion, $250 billion. It looks like they've weathered the storm. Their share price yesterday was almost exactly what the share price was on the 1st of January. So there was a massive dip when the COVID-19 crisis hit, but they recovered and they're now steadily pottering along and maintaining their business. But Intel really is the organization of the past from the point of view of having dominated the industry for 50 years. It doesn't mean that they're not relevant anymore and that they're not relevant to the future. But in terms of industry dominance, that is the past. Have a look at the future. This is NVIDIA Corporation. They are best known for their graphics processors. And those are the chips that are primarily used in gaming machines. But two things have happened since lockdown began. Firstly, gaming has exploded worldwide. So demand for NVIDIA chips has also exploded. But there's an additional element. what computer manufacturers have realized in the last few months is that these chips are ideal for artificial intelligence processing. So almost without intending it to be so, these are the chips of the future. And suddenly other chip makers are having to catch up with the likes of NVIDIA. But now look at their market capitalization as well. From having been a fraction the size of Intel at the beginning of the year, they are now at $256 billion, neck and neck with Intel. And for a few days last week, NVIDIA, in fact, overtook Intel. But to understand the future, you also have to look at the past. And I'm going to show you Intel versus NVIDIA historically. That is Intel's all-time graph of share price performance. And you can see that they are, in fact, not at their all-time high. That all-time high came in the year 2000. And that's when we saw the tech bubble crashing or bursting. And companies like Intel, Microsoft, and every other tech company in the world taking a massive hit. But look how long it took Intel to recover. It took 20 years for them to regain the kind of value and the kind of share price that they saw in the year 2000. So if you look at it in a long-term perspective, you could almost say Intel is back where it started in terms of the year 2000 and its performance this century. Now look at NVIDIA. That is acceleration of change. That is a company that is heading for the future. And this is why I say it's a war between the past and the future, because when you compare the two performances, you can see that in the next few days or weeks, NVIDIA is going to shoot past Intel if the current trends hold. And it can be that once we come out of the COVID-19 crisis, that things could go back to normal. Intel will carry on performing at that level, and NVIDIA will come crashing down. But the truth is that NVIDIA isn't performing only because of the demand for games. It's performing because of the demand for the computer of the future. So this is where you see the winner in the war between the past and the future. The other key component of the operations of business is the document. And the document is really at the heart of digitization, which is converting existing analog material into digital, and digitalization, which is converting processes into digital. But at the start, you have the document. And let's see what's happening in the world of servicing the document. This is HP Inc., which split off from the HP Group. HP Inc. and HP Enterprise are now the hardware and software and services alternatives to the original HP. HP Inc.'s primary business is in printers and document management. So they are really at the heart of the document revolution, or they should be. But look at their share price performance. Their market capitalization is now standing at $25 billion from having been well over $30 billion at the start of the year. They took a massive hit when COVID-19 arrived, and they are slightly recovered from that time, but really also pottering along. In fact, their graph looks very similar to Intel's graph since the crisis first hit in the middle of March. Now look at the future. DocuSign, they are in document management, pure and simple. Their initial core business was purely creating digital signatures or allowing documents to be signed digitally. Now look at their market capitalization, $37 billion. They're worth 50% more than HP, and they don't have physical assets in terms of what they sell. It's all digital. So by having a foundation for digital transformation at the heart of their business, at the core of their business offering, they represent the future. It doesn't mean HP Inc. is consigned to the past and won't play a role in the future. But in terms of winning the war for the future, you can see that enabling digital transformation is at the heart of it. Enabling the document per se is irrelevant. It's what you are able to then do with a document in a digital world. DocuSign gives three fundamental bases for what they're trying to achieve. It's to eliminate friction and complexity of manual processes, which digitization allows. It's to meet industry standard compliances more easily, which is a combination of digitization and digitalization. And then to increase productivity and efficiencies, that is pure and simple digital transformation, or the digitalization of the business. Let's come down to the South African experience and show you what we are all experiencing and what factors are going to shape the future. So this isn't the shape of the future, but rather how the future will be shaped. So again, coming back to IDC, who kindly yesterday supplied this graph to me, and I would like to thank Mark Walker for these statistics. What it shows is the expected growth of each key industry sector, and then the actual growth that we will now see with the advent of COVID-19. So prior to COVID-19, for example, communications was expected to grow by 6.3%. In the midst of COVID-19, that has been reduced to 2.9%. But that is still a positive. There is still growth in communications. Look what happens to manufacturing. From 2% growth, it's going to decline by 4%. The worst of them is transportation. From mild growth, 1.5%, it's going to see a massive drop of almost 10%. And the other big drop is retail and wholesale. From 3.5% expected growth, it's going to decline by 8.5% this year. So those don't sound like massive percentages, but in terms of GDP and the impact on the economy, that is huge. But what it also tells us is where the opportunity lies. And communications clearly is one of those sectors. Education is another. So the expected growth and the actual growth is exactly the same. Healthcare we'll come back to shortly. Healthcare looks like it's actually a beneficiary. 4% expected growth, 4.1% is now the anticipated growth thanks to COVID-19. But that is because of the massive spending that is needed to deal with the crisis. So healthcare's resilience there is really about crisis. It's not about opportunity. Education, you could say something similar, but there are great opportunities in education as well. With that as the background, let's look at what Stats SA found when they surveyed the public. Bear in mind that their April 2020 survey was online only, so it reached people who are geared towards being online, geared to filling in surveys online, and therefore tends to be people who have more access than most. And Stats SA themselves acknowledged that the 3,500 or so people who took part were mostly in full-time employment or self-employed, and mostly had tertiary or post-school education. So bear in mind, this is the elite of South African society and what they are experiencing. And I'm going to show you their experience again in terms of health, wealth, and happiness. So firstly, the impact of COVID-19 on different aspects of society. Of course, the pending economic collapse is the biggest concern for everyone. 71% had extreme concern about this. And when you add it to the very concerned, that came to well over 90% were concerned about this. But the rest of them were all about health concerns. So the health of vulnerable persons, when you add those two, 80% were concerned about that. Overall impact on the health system in terms of overloading the health system, almost 90%. And then the health of a household member, well over 60%, more than 2/3 of respondents were concerned about that. Own health, 60% were concerned. So massive concerns around health. And that tells you a lot about the stress levels of the South African affluent and elite. In terms of wealth, there's one specific stat I want to talk about here. This is the percentage of respondents who managed to minimize their risk of exposure to the coronavirus by different means. And the key stat here is one that seems to be one of the less significant, and that is working from home. But 73% of respondents were able to work from home. And that begins to tell you a lot about the digital transformation levels in South Africa and where it is the strongest. So in the elite, those who are educated and those who have jobs, almost 3/4 were able to continue working from home. And that is why remote working is getting so much attention in this country, and why servicing the remote worker is a massive opportunity in the high-tech environment. And then happiness. And this literally is a measure of happiness. Percentage of respondents who hugged, kissed, or shook hands with non-household members outside their homes. And this is according to age group. You could say this is also a measure of irresponsibility, but the proportion of people not able to touch another human being outside of their home also gives you a sense of the extent to which people are kept from happiness. And the age group that comes the closest is 18 to 34, where 8.5%, less than 1 in 10 South Africans in this sample frame in that age group were able to touch another human being. And then as you go up the age ranges, you see less and less happiness that is available to society. So those of retirement age, 65 plus, only 1.4% were able to hug, kiss, or shake hands with a non-household member, for good reason, because they are also the most vulnerable in the COVID-19 crisis. But this underlines the extent to which happiness is a casualty of the COVID-19 crisis, and a massive casualty. So we have to understand the stress that everyone is going through from the point of view of health, wealth, and happiness. Then Stats SA also conducted a business impact survey of COVID-19 in April and in May this year. And I'm going to show you a graph from each of those surveys. Firstly, in April, they looked at the percentage of businesses that closed temporarily or completely during the lockdown phase. So this is the first month of lockdown. 46% of businesses, almost half of businesses, had to close, most fortunately temporarily. But now we look at the industry sectors and we see why some sectors are suffering more than others. Look at construction and manufacturing. 74% and 58% respectively had to close down. Trading, 56% had to close down. Real estate, a third of businesses. Electricity, gas and water supply, a third of businesses. Transport, storage and communication, a third of businesses had to close down. This is where you see the real impact on the ability of businesses to generate revenue. And then in the May survey, they asked businesses whether they had to lay off staff. And 36% said that they had to lay off staff. This is versus only 20% in April. So as lockdown bit deeper and deeper into companies' resilience and their ability to continue operating, so the number of people having to be laid off increased dramatically. Decreased working hours diminished slightly from 28% to 25%, but that is precisely because staff had to be laid off, and those staff who were still employed tended to be working longer hours than ever before. That's a lot of pain that you're seeing in these graphs. And then the next survey that I want to share with you is the very complexly named survey, the National Income Dynamics Study Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey. This is one of the most comprehensive surveys ever conducted into impact on the economy and on people of economic factors. They have a sample base of 28,000 people, of which they survey 7,000 every single month. And it's a collaboration across most of the major universities in South Africa. It's led by Stellenbosch University. It has a number of funders, including the Alan Gray Foundation and the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. Michael Dell, of course, being the founder of Dell. So this is one of the most fascinating findings of this survey, that 79% of women and 65% of men were spending over 4 hours more on childcare every single day. So suddenly this equalized the responsibility of men and women in terms of childcare. But look at the impact this has on the person who has to work from home. So all very well that 75% of people, or almost 75% of people, are able to work from home. Almost that exact same proportion of people also were having to spend far more time on childcare. And this tells us that you have to be very careful about demanding that people working remotely be fixed to their computer and be focused on their job from 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. It's just not possible. And there has to be compassion for the struggles of the South African remote worker. And then in terms of jobs from the same survey, the percentage of people who were retrenched or furloughed, a very American term, but being used in South Africa as well, where you are sent on leave without pay. And you can see the massive impact of the combination of retrenchment and furlough on South Africans. But what you can also see here, and if you can't clearly see the labels underneath, is which segments of the population suffered the most. And right at the end, the poorest 50% of the population, 39% of those were either retrenched or furloughed. When you look at the richest 25% on the other end, only 15% were retrenched or furloughed. So what we really see is that at the top end of the economy, the suffering was minor compared to what's happening at the bottom end of the economy. So that is going to have long-term implications in terms of the demand on South African social services, healthcare, and the ability of the South African revenue services to collect taxes. The burden on the rich from a tax point of view is going to be even greater. But on the other hand, the burden of unemployment and hunger will be the greatest on the poor. And this is a perfect example of what's happening. In fact, today there's a nationwide protest by restaurant owners and workers with a hashtag jobs save lives. And there's a petition to the president to step in and assist the restaurant industry in the absolute decimation that is happening in that environment. Massive amount of job losses happening. There's an estimate that of something like 15,000 restaurants that have had to close down, only 1,500 are part of franchises, which means that the bulk are owner or entrepreneur managed or run, and they don't have the resources of franchises. So for that reason, where one can support the services that restaurants are offering in terms of delivery or collection, one should, because you're not just doing it for your own indulgence, you're also doing it to help an incredibly distressed segment of the economy. Vusi Tembekwayo of Watermark Africa, well-known industry commentator, describes the domino effect of these vanishing restaurants. More demand for UIF, reduced taxes, SME suppliers to the restaurants are suffering, and the retail neighbors of these restaurants are losing income and in many cases going out of business as well. So restaurants closing is not just about restaurants closing, it's about other stores and other businesses also suffering, and finally landlords ending up with empty properties. So there's a great need for government also to step in and try to shore up the restaurant industry in some way. And those empty offices, empty premises, also bring us to the new shape of the office. This is not the office of the future with all high-tech accessories, but rather the empty office and the empty boardroom. This is an artist's impression, but it's also the reality that we are seeing in office buildings across the country. This is what the South African Property Owners Association says in their office vacancy survey from last year before COVID-19. Remote working had already led to high vacancy rates, 11% in the third quarter of last year. So imagine that trend already emptying out offices combined with the impact of COVID-19. And then, as APSA's economist put it, new office space has to be more aligned to flexible space, green credentials, and lower operating costs. But that lower operating costs is also leading to many offices, in fact, shutting down and having their people work from home. And in some cases, also just scaling down their existing operations. So the demand for commercial property is crashing at the moment. And that's largely thanks to remote working. Industrial property, on the other hand, is one of the many bright spots. According to Clint Murray of Galetti Corporate Real Estate in the Western Cape, there are three primary factors that are boosting it. The one is tenant incentives, and that's an obvious. If you don't incentivize tenants, they're simply going to give up their property or go elsewhere because there's such oversupply at the moment. But two fascinating elements that are boosting industrial property at the moment is because of global supply chains being so badly disrupted, local production is scaling up dramatically. Initially, in the medical supplies environment for protective equipment in particular, but in many other areas where it's becoming more difficult and more risky to rely on global supply, production is moving locally. And the other one, and this is something we talked about a lot in the previous edition of this talk, is e-commerce fulfillment, requiring massive warehousing. In fact, the idea that e-commerce is more profitable than physical retail because you don't need physical shelf space is wrong-headed thinking, because e-commerce needs massive warehousing space, which traditional retail doesn't need. Traditional retail tends to operate on the basis of being supplied from the factories or from distribution points, but not through warehousing. Whereas e-commerce depends heavily on warehousing. If you have ever been to the Take-A-Lot warehouse in Kempton Park on the East Rand, you'll understand the scale of an e-commerce fulfillment center versus a traditional fulfillment center. It's massive, and they are having to rely on robotics to enable them to cope with the demand going through that center. Now multiply that by the increase in demand for e-commerce services across the country, and primarily by the big retailers, and you understand why industrial property is suddenly one of the next big things. Then we move on to the health sector. And there's a misconception that health is undergoing digital transformation because telehealth and remote consulting are such great concepts. The real response to that is that you can't really take concepts when you need medicine and when you need medical care and when you don't know what's wrong with you. It's all very well to have a remote consultation with your doctor if you're able to describe your symptoms. It doesn't help if you don't understand what's going wrong with you and you have to see a doctor. But there's one further problem with this concept in South Africa, and this is because this is really the shape of health in South Africa and of health services in this country. So we may well have free health services at government hospitals and clinics across the country, but the experience of that health service is dismal. The need to wait almost an entire day just to get your medicine dispensed or to be seen by a doctor really compromises the dignity of South Africans in a massive way. So we need huge investment just in basic healthcare. Before we can talk about the digitalization of health, we have to talk about the customer experience of health. In most sectors, digital transformation enhances the customer experience. In health, it's still a heavily manual procedure and requirement. Education is a sector we talked about last time, but to emphasize, in education, the digital divide during COVID-19 became a digital gulf, as we saw the huge gap between those schools that were able to move to remote learning and those for whom it was simply a foreign concept. So the reality is that that is the situation. There's nothing we can do about it in terms of what happened in the first 3 months of lockdown and children having to learn from home or doing nothing from home. But now we must prepare for a future, a digital education future where blended learning is possible, but not only for blended learning. It's not only about being able to learn online and offline. We also have to prepare for the jobs of the future. This session overall is termed workforce transformation. And workforce transformation begins with education for workforce transformation. There is no question that the workforce will be transformed. But at the moment, education is still untransformed. And that is the foundation for the workforce of the future. So we are laying a very fragile foundation for that future. Computer literacy must be integrated into the curriculum from the very start. When a child arrives at school for the first time in kindergarten, in grade school, they have to already start learning what a computer is and what it can do. If you're part of the elite, part of the privileged, it's part of your environment. But for the average South African child, it's a foreign concept. And that has to change almost instantly. It has to become integrated into the experience from as early an age as possible. And then at the other end of the scale, where we see today's matrics already doing calculus, which is unimaginable a generation ago, there is going to be a new demand. So consider this, that arithmetic became mathematics, became calculus in terms of a continuum of increasing complexity or levels of learning about mathematics. The demand for the future is that artificial intelligence is going to have to be part of that curriculum as well. How does artificial intelligence work? What is the basis for it? And what can it do? That's got to be something that's integral to the understanding of almost any subject, of almost any discipline in school. It starts with maths, and it has to start by computer literacy being integrated at every level of the curriculum. There are 3 Ps, and you'll see quite a few rules of 3 in the next section of this presentation. But the 3 Ps for education and for workforce transformation are to prepare, and then this will come as a shock to you, to prepare, and an even bigger shock, prepare. That's really the only rule for preparing for workforce transformation, is you have to prepare the worker of the future for that future. We move on to the retail sector, which we also discussed in depth in the previous edition. But in terms of coming out of the lockdown of retail, this is now the perception that we all have of retail, that it's all about selling only essential goods or essential equipment. But there's far more to retail than face masks and PPEs. And I want to tell the story of Mr. Price's latest annual results, which they revealed a few weeks ago, because this gives you a sense of what digital transformation and preparation for the future does for a business. So April 2020, when all stores closed down, their sales over the previous April fell 89% in that month. That's massive. For most businesses, and especially for small businesses, that actually can lead to closing down the business. But in May and June, when they reopened and pent-up demand kicked in, their sales were up 12% on the same period for the previous year. Now that is good news already, and that is a great positive. It doesn't, however, make up for that sales slump that was down 89%. But look what happened next. Online sales for Mr. P was 90% up on the previous year. And in two particular segments, Mr. Price Apparel and Mr. Price Sport, sales doubled online. The key to this massive success story was omni-channel e-commerce. And this, their CEO acknowledged in their annual report, was thanks to their omni-channel strategy, they were able to weather the storm and in fact thrive in the storm. Omni-channel means that you are able to service the customer on any channel in which the customer wants to be serviced. So it's not just about having a physical store and an online store. It's also about having a strong mobile presence, about having an effective app, and then also having effective fulfillment. Because without fulfillment, your omni-channel strategy is dead. And this is the alternative to an omni-channel strategy. This is a picture taken by My Broadband at Centurion Mall in Pretoria during lockdown. And this showed the extent to which lockdown wasn't just about closing stores, it was actually about closing down stores. And these were stores that had not prepared for an omni-channel future. Look at the travel industry. There's little you can do in terms of omni-channel travel. This is the Delta fleet locked down at Atlanta Airport, the busiest airport in the world, not a single plane leaving, and all the planes in cold storage, so to speak. This is what air travel is like at the moment for many people. You have to look very hard to find the one individual sitting in this cabin. But even ground travel, this is one of the busiest railway stations in the world, Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich, completely silent as lockdown kicked in. The response to this is very difficult for an airline, for a railway organization, but there are approaches, there are strategies that can be adopted. And one of my favorite that I've seen from across the world is from Poland, of all places. And this is a Polish car maker called Trigo. And their Trigo vehicle is an all-electric vehicle that can move sideways or forwards. Only takes 2 people in it, but it's low cost, low carbon footprint, and it's a response to what they expect to be the change design of the city of the future. As remote working kicks in even more heavily over the long term, as office space becomes less utilized, and as people start living further and further from the center of cities, the nature of transport is going to change as well. And transport will become far more personalized. And this is the ultimate personalized car. There are bright spots in the economy and in different segments. And I'm going to share one of my favorites with you. This is an organization called the Drum Cafe. On top, you see them performing for the audience, and at the bottom, you see the audience participating in that performance. You'd never have thought that men in suits could get excited about being able to beat a drum, but there are numerous such images showing crowds of people. Yes, I know that's very uncomfortable to have to watch in this era. Crowds of people rubbing shoulders and beating drums or beating sticks. How does an organization like that survive lockdown? Very comfortably. This is a scene from one of the events. The second square at the top from the left is the actual performance that you see. And the rest is all participants, all drumming in time and rubbing virtual shoulders together as they participate in a corporate event. And as you can see, you have dozens of people participating and being part of it and engaging in team building all virtually. This is a great example of pivoting not your business model, but how your business in fact interacts with your customer. if the drum cafe, that depends so heavily on the physical and on noise and sound and participation, can make that transition online, almost any industry can find ways of doing that. But that, of course, does depend on your customer base also having the means to participate online. We've gone through a tale of 3 years in one. It's been the year of pandemic, it's been the year of the pivot, and it's the year of preparing. Let's look at what happens when you pivot versus when you don't pivot. And I'm going to share 2 very famous brand names with you in terms of their performance. Again, looking at their share price, because when you follow the money, you see the shape of the present and the future. This is Uber from the beginning of the year to today. They're a $56 billion business. It looked like they were going to tank when the COVID-19 crisis hit. Look at how sharply their share price dipped in the middle of March. And then they came back quite comfortably. And they, in fact, at a higher level now, their share price is higher than it was on the 1st of January. Why? Because they instantly understood that they had the means to support the failing restaurant business and therefore support their own business. So by collaborating with restaurants and by making Uber Eats their core business, they were able to recover and also help many of these restaurants recover, but at the same time, keep many of their drivers in work as well. So it was a win-win-win all round. There are negatives, of course. Uber has laid off a large proportion of people. It's not a guaranteed business at the moment. And Uber Eats also takes a big chunk of the restaurant's earnings. So the restaurants are not entirely comfortable with it, but it's a fantastic example of how an instant pivot almost saved the business. And then you compare that with their biggest competitor in the United States, and that is Lyft. And you can see Lyft took that same hit at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. And they also recovered slightly, but not dramatically. And they're languishing again because they haven't been able to pivot their business. They are still relying on the standard ride-sharing model. It's also a case of preparing versus not preparing. And now I'm going to firstly share a selfie with you. Now, anyone who knows me will know I never take selfies, but when you have the opportunity to have a pic with Michael Dell and there's no one to take the picture, you're going to take that selfie. It didn't work out too well for me, but Michael looks great in it. I had the opportunity to chat with him last year during Dell Technologies World in Las Vegas, and his lessons from then resonate very powerfully during the COVID-19 crisis. One of the things he said is, we've all learned that you have to evolve and change what you're doing to stay relevant. That's how his organization has remained the massive force that it is today, from originally just selling computers out of a car boot. The second message was that you have to take chances, that many corporations talk about risk reduction and risk management, which is going to be a big element of business continuity during the COVID-19 crisis. But you have to take risks if you want to innovate. And crucially, all risks won't be successful, but you have to learn from what doesn't work and from what does work. Use the data that is now available to you. And with digital transformation in particular, we have more data available than ever before. Combine that data with artificial intelligence if you're a large organization, and you're able to start very quickly responding to what is working, what isn't working, and how it needs to change. And then you can make adjustments as you go. But finally, this is really at the heart of what he was saying. The trust of customers is the heart of a company's success. To continue winning their trust, we have to keep reinventing ourselves all the time. And that is built into our culture. And that is really the lesson from Michael for any organization. Your culture has to be about constant reinvention. And isn't that the single biggest demand of the COVID-19 crisis? Isn't that also the single biggest dividend of digital transformation? I talk about the cat rules of the new future. Yes, I know if you have a cat, the cat does rule the household, but CAT, customer centricity, adaptability, and transformation, that is how you prepare for the new future. And that is how you can be ready, not just for the shape of the new future, but to also play a part in shaping that new future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arthur. That was most informative. As usual, your experience and knowledge and market understanding comes through in the discussion. There's a lot of interesting feedback or comments on it, but I'm going to save that for later. What I'd like to do is just open up to the audience for a moment and see if there's anybody who wants to post a specific question for you. We still have an opportunity later to continue the conversation, but to the audience, is there anybody who's interested in a question that we can answer now or specifically for Arthur? Okay, I'm not seeing any text come up, so we'll leave it for later. So just as we continue, thank you, Arthur. We'll reconvene a little bit later. So before we get to the next speakers, I wanted to mention that we've got a very, very interesting giveaway. I know it's kind of difficult with the social distancing as I can't pass you a gift across the screen. But Jolene on the marketing side, thank you for setting this up, Jolene. Jolene has organized a beautiful SMEG coffee machine. Yes, guys, you heard correctly. To the Dell guys, to the First Tech guys, you are not included in this, unfortunately. But for the audience, there will be a survey sent out to you after the event, which you will have to respond to. There may or may not be questions from the Dell session. I can't tell you definitely, but it's probably good for you to listen in. And please complete that survey so that we can get a nice SMEG machine delivered to you. I think it's going to look beautiful in anybody's kitchen, not to mention the coffee itself. So yeah, I'd like to introduce some of the colleagues from Dell side. As many of you know, we work very closely with Dell as one of our key partners and have put together many interesting solutions. We've got two very experienced individuals today, Jonathan Ryle from the Client Solutions Field Marketing team, a lot of experience in how the technology fits a customer's business requirements along this digital transformation road that we're traveling. And then Chris Buchanan. Chris Buchanan has been with Dell for many years in South Africa. You could probably call him the Dell South African founding member. He's been here since the beginning, building Dell from when they started putting their footprint into Africa in the early days. Chris is a director at Dell around the end user compute side and comes with a host of experience and has supported us in many areas. So if I can introduce Jonathan and Chris and ask you to come up on the screen, please.
Thanks, Faraz. Really appreciate the introduction and really appreciate the opportunity to come and share some of our insights with you. I don't think it's going to be as we're going to be as articulate as Arthur. It was a fascinating talk that I really appreciated that, and I think his, health, wealth, and happiness were a really interesting measure. I took some percentages on that thing, and he said health at 60% concern, wealth about 73% are able to work from home, but the happiness index of 4.7% is, I think a lot of us are feeling that at the moment. It's a really difficult time. So hopefully we'll come up with some insights into that as well and bridge off it. But I really appreciate the opportunity as well to address the members of First Technology as well as your customers. So without further ado, I'll hand over to John, who's going to do a quick intro on what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
It's up.
You're right. We just need to go to slide.
Great. Okay, just checking. Okay, cool. So we are in slide mode. Yes, so we today wanted to have a conversation around workforce transformation. From a Dell perspective, we've sort of changed the wording a little bit over time. We were talking workforce transformation a number of years ago. And we've got a new umbrella name for the product. We call it Dell Technologies Unified Workspace, and how we're unifying the entire end user experience. We talk about building a digital workspace. I think beginning of this year, I was quite happily coming to the office every day, doing my day job. I had a nice sort of workshop which I'd come to, and I'd be able to receive new kits and open it up and interact with my colleagues. If they needed a device, it was pretty simple. I could just go and hand a device over to my colleague. So collaboration was really simple in the office environment for myself. I felt pretty productive. I was able to get a lot done in a work day. And just to give you a bit of perspective, I got 3 children. So when we hit lockdown at the beginning of this year, and suddenly I went from being in the office and having extra time to myself, minus now those 4 hours that Arthur sort of mentioned where we're doing schoolwork. I've got 3 kids in 3 different grades in 2 different schools. And I must be honest, my calculus is definitely not on the level it should be, because it's really difficult to be able to help my son do his sort of day schoolwork while I'm still doing my day job. So, the dynamic has changed considerably, but the sort of Dell Technologies unified workspace hasn't. This is the beauty of this product and the program that we've put together is that, whether it's in the office environment, whether it's a work from home solution, whether it's a traveling executive, the product allows all of our customers to remain productive and to be their best selves in any situation. So with that, we kind of looked at the journey that a user would take in this sort of environment. And the focus really comes down to the end user or the employee experience. How are we enabling our users to be their best selves? I think about a couple of years ago, or it was really just one size fits all. You could buy a 14 or 15-inch notebook and deploy it to anybody or anywhere in your environment. And that was it, Core i5, 8 gig of RAM, and everybody got the same. But that has dynamically changed where people are working in completely new ways. And so we need to understand how people are doing their day-to-day job and be able to cater for them so that they can be their most productive. And at the end of the day, it's about, yes.
I'm coming in here, but I suppose we see it as our responsibility to add to that happiness index, right? So it's making sure that all those employees out there who are isolated, struggling with productivity issues, as you said, balancing family life and everything like that, how do you actually make it a little bit easier? And, we spoke about we've been speaking probably for the last 2 or 3 years about the different personas, and any of those people who've attended some of Dell's talks in the past few months, we had, 5 personas where we talk about the corridor warriors and the on-the-go pros and, all these different dynamics that would play into people in terms of the way that they're working. And a lot of it was trying to integrate mobility into a workspace. Now, the challenge with integrating mobility into workspace is when we look at it today, there's actually just one persona at the moment. It will evolve, but the one persona is a remote worker. And it's how do we make that remote worker feel part of a team? What are the technologies that we can use? And what are the considerations that organizations need to take when they're developing solutions around the customer? And Arthur spoke a little bit about the NVIDIA versus the Intel and tracking their performance and the thing that the gaming market is increasing. And a lot of that is, people are looking at their device because the amount of time that they are now spending in front of their device and have the dependency, on that device, laptop, desktop, phone, whatever it might be, is a lot higher than what it was. I think if you talk about 4 hours more childcare, you're probably finding 4 hours more time in front of a screen. And that's just to make sure that you're keeping up with things that you used to be able to do reasonably simply. We were having a conversation the other day around productivity and how you could make people more productive. The challenge in making them more productive is, we're all working longer hours. Whether or not we're more productive, I'm not sure. And it's using those tools that, how to collaborate, how to share, digitization versus digitalization, those processes, and making sure that they all work well. And John and I, who work together in a team, we could very easily at any part of the time of the day be doing exactly the same thing. And if it wasn't for the fact that we're checking with each other and sharing information, we start becoming less productive. So it's considering all of those things, making sure that people feel fulfilled in, at the end of a work day, at the end of a work week, so we don't deal with these Groundhog Day. I woke up on Tuesday and I didn't even know it was Saturday. I was like, every day just blends one into the other, and helping people interact with each other and bringing a little bit more of a personal touch into the way that people are working. So these are the things we're talking about in the employee experience, improving the customer experience, but the customer experience of your employees. So thinking of them first and making sure that happy employees are going to make happy customers. Arthur spoke about, our passion at delivering solutions to our customers and making sure that they get a lot of value out of the technology that we provide. That's a key consideration here, making sure that when you sit down in front of your device, it works and it gives you what you want. So I'll hand over back to you, John.
Great. Yeah. And I was just thinking this morning, my son asked me what day it was, and I said Thursday. So there you go. The days just blending into each other as it feels. And Arthur also mentioned prepare, but I don't think anything could have really prepared what hits sort of March timeframe. And what we kind of saw was a trend with our customers to go out and to buy whatever was available to enable their users. I mean, 74% working from home in South Africa. We did a bit of a survey within Dell as well, and we found that pre-March timeframe or beginning of this year, about 20% of people worked remotely globally. And that number has shot up to over 90%, 94 it was. And it's going to sort of normalize, we believe in the long run at about 40%. So, this is definitely here to stay. And what we found as well was that, companies that were prepared, that were already in the cloud, found the transition a lot easier than companies who, hadn't really anticipated a move to the cloud. Dell itself was a company of 120,000 people that we were able to move completely to the cloud within a week. Every single employee was working at home remotely with no loss of productivity. And it's been quite interesting that, the only real issues that have come up is, people saying, hey, we would really like to be able to have our office chair. I don't really have a comfortable place to sit. And so we got an email, a few weeks back saying that, you can come to the office, collect your chair, collect your monitors, things like that to just enable people to work better at home. But it brings us to how are we helping customers to, go through this journey? Day one productivity becomes a key consideration. How do we get somebody up and running within minutes of receiving a new machine? In the old days, we used to sit and stare at a device for 2 weeks or somebody else's device for 2 weeks as we learned the job while we waited for IT to issue a machine. That's not going to work anymore. And then, optimize performance. How do we give the person the best possible experience? And then an uninterrupted workflow, which is your warranties and your supports in the back end. And then, of course, how do we, responsibly retire these devices at the end of the period? So it kind of takes us to, the needs of the end user. And I thought this was quite interesting. 1 out of 4 people would report that negative technology experience would impact their career decisions. They would actually make a career choice to join your company or not based on the type of technology that you would give them. And if you think about it, the reality is that within a company, we have up to 5 different generations of people working. You've got millennials, Gen Zs, you've got some people that have been around for a little longer within the organization. And the millennials and Gen Zs are coming out and they want the latest, greatest tech. They want a device that looks good. They want a device that is light, long battery life. They're looking for the latest technologies. And so that one size fits all solution doesn't fit anymore. And so
that are interrupting that experience, John, are organizations, and I think that probably 1 out of 4 is probably more like 2 out of 4 now in the remote working environment. And a lot of that is a very panicked approach towards how you're going to secure your data. And I just see the thing that you talk about, that we're talking about up there around the security. It's very invasive. It's how do you allow a secure login and someone that's going to be interacting with the information? They now have to work as if they were in the office walls, as if they were within the firewalls, but they're now outside the organization. And logging in and accessing that data becomes a key consideration. And the data is no longer in the data center. for people to be able to work with it, it is on that plethora of devices that are spread around the organization. And that balance, I always think of that seesaw where you've got to balance productivity, making sure that people are incredibly productive, as well as make sure that you're still securing the amount of information. And we have seen a massive increase in terms of breaches, a lot of ransomware attacks and things like that in the last few months that our customers are reporting back to us. And they're trying to now tighten up their security a little bit, but also not impacting the productivity, because it can be incredibly frustrating for a user on the back end. So I think that negative technology experience is increasing, and it's not just the device, right? It's the tools and how you actually use them, and in terms of interacting with the applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when you look at the actual approach, when you have the end user first approach, it certainly needs to have that single pane of glass that allows them to do deployment, security management, and support. And they need tools to enable that, especially now where, a company used to have 1,000 people under one roof. They've now got 1,000 people under 1,000 roofs in different locations. And those users are sometimes using their own devices in a BYOD type scenario. They also need mobile applications. They need to be able to work on the road. And so you need some sort of unified workspace, a product or a solution that allows IT to be able to manage iOS devices, Windows devices, Android devices, phones, in a central way that allows the end user to have an experience where the technology becomes invisible to the end user. So he's able to collaborate on multiple devices, pick up where he left off on a new device without having to, actually feel the technology. Single sign-on becomes really important in these type scenarios. And this is where the Dell Technologies Unified Workspace uses VMware's Workspace ONE product. And this product allows our customers to manage the deployment, the security, the management, and even the support of their products. Whether it's a mobile phone, whether it's a tablet, a Dell, or even a non-Dell device, throughout their entire environment. And so it kind of leads us to the personalized hardware conversation. We understand that there's a demand on devices at the moment, especially mobile devices. We saw huge amounts of entry-level products like Inspiron and Vostro being sold at the beginning of sort of the March timeframe. And we kind of refer this to the do-it-light type phase, where our customers had a need, they had to fulfill that need immediately. And so any device that they could get their hands on were acceptable. Whether it was a user's home device, whether it was a machine that they gave them from the office, or a machine they had to go out and buy. And so budget reallocations were done, and customers had to, go out and buy kits. But part of this conversation is, how do we get past the do-it-light phase where we're just buying whatever is available, and we're actually moving to a conversation about doing it right? How do we get the right kits into the hands of our users so that they can be their most productive? And it's going to be a continuing challenge. We had a whole bunch of great products launching at CES 2020, and these are some of the products that launched. And I just wanted to point out on the left-hand side, Alienware. Now, this is completely a consumer gaming device. The notebook itself is a 17-inch notebook that has a desktop CPU in it. It's the most powerful notebook that we've ever launched. And what's funny or interesting about this is that we've got customers. Last week, I had 2 requests from salespeople asking me questions, commercial questions about the Alienware. Can I dock the Alienware? Will it work with the Type-C docking stations that we have? Because our users have the ability or being enabled by their companies in some cases to be able to go out and purchase machines sort of back to the BYOD scenario where this becomes their primary work device. They can do entry-level 2D graphics. They can do their day job on it. But on the weekend, they can let loose and play some Call of Duty or play some games too. So it becomes a dual-purpose device. And we're seeing more and more of those type scenarios which are coming into play. The challenge with that is that now you've got a new operating system, a new image to manage, new firmware drivers, BIOS, to be able to push down to these devices. And so, new challenges sort of come into play. There's also different scenarios. When we talk work from home, it's not just a mobile device now that's still important. We actually have many customers who are still buying desktop PCs, which is quite an interesting scenario, because at the beginning, everything went mobile and our PC business sort of took quite a bit of a dip. And the latest stats that I've seen is that our PC business is back to where it was sort of the beginning of the year. We're sitting at the same quantities of sales across EMEA. So it's quite interesting that, desktops are also being adopted in that works from home type scenario. So we can't rule them out. But what is coming into play are certain technologies that are enabling our end users. Just something, simple that came up. I received some training about 2 weeks ago about cameras. And it might seem like a, kind of a silly thing. Okay, well, it's a camera. It's just a HD camera on a notebook. But the camera now is front and center of literally front and center of the device. It sits at the top of the display. But within that 2.25 millimeter space, that little camera, there are 4 lenses. And those lenses have hardware on the back end, which takes out the noise of a photograph or an image, the little splotchy images that are displayed on the device. And this is now valued highly amongst our home users who are spending all their time doing video calls on things like Teams or on Zoom. And so, technologies, carry on.
Obviously, when you're talking about image or picture, the other considerations when you're talking about, user experience is obviously sound. Sound is probably as critical. And I think that you and I took it for granted. It was like we were obviously on our mobile phones mostly before, pre-pandemic. We were spending a lot of time with maybe headsets and things like that. But getting sound out of the device now in a better way and, allowing you to interact quite quickly when you log in, dial in, exactly as we're interacting at the moment, being able to receive sound from a microphone, but also just, display or transmit sound back so that you don't get echoes, you don't get feedback, taking out all those noise. Those are absolutely critical considerations. If you've got a scratchy headset, whilst you're working, and that could probably drive you crazy after a while. So these are the things that we're working on in terms of innovating on the hardware side.
Absolutely. And, we're spending so much time staring at our screens, for example, the new displays that we're launching, and on our premium 4K monitors, we now have low blue light displays on these machines. So it eliminates the blue light that is being emitted, which then takes away eye fatigue. So there's so many different technologies that are sort of underlying or under the skin that make that home use experience just that little bit better. Things like battery life was a conversation we would have sort of pre this scenario, but we're going to discuss a little later just about how intelligence and artificial intelligence is actually going to improve the overall battery life over the next year and a half or 3 years that you're using a particular device. And so, the innovation is really also key to that end user experience. Taking us just to those personas, as Chris said, the last number of years, we've been talking about different personas in your organization. You had desktop users, you had corridor warriors, you had on-the-go professionals, engineers, and specialists like military, or it could be police. And they all use different devices. And so we would come out to our customers and we would spend time with them helping to design a set of personas so that we could identify the correct machine for those users. And it's sort of all wrapped up to that very center picture of, the lady working at home, the remote worker. But what's interesting is still within that remote working space, you still have your specialized users, your engineers, your desktop users, your mobile users who still need to be mobile. And so the focus hasn't gone away from, the full stack of PCs or, the products to just a remote mobile worker. But we remain focused on where we're going to be after the sort of do it right phase enters again. And then there's also a consideration around VDI. I don't think we talk enough about virtual desktops and how significant they can be for a company who's enabling people in multiple locations.
John, I think maybe we should move on to a little bit, make it more real in terms of what customers, our customers and our partners need to be considering in terms of how they can, in this new environment, move towards a day one productivity. So perfect timing on that slide. It's using the tools that are out there, setting yourself an objective, and hopefully at the end of this, we'll have given a bit of an idea of a roadmap as to how to get to the ideal remote working scenario where you've got workers scattered all over the place. And in this new world, how we can make sure that those devices are secured, managed, and supported properly.
Absolutely. So, when we talk about do it right, it's really about being able to have a sort of planning and designing phase integrated back into the conversation. And this is where you would, be able to communicate with Dell Computer, with First Technology, and we would be able to have that persona conversation about PC refreshes, about Windows 10, about migration, Workspace 1, and how we can enable your users while keeping them secure. We offer a number of deployment services. When we talk about day one productivity, it's about how do we get a device in front of a user, fully loaded with your custom image, where he's ready to work within the first 10, 15 minutes of receiving his new device. And this is enabled through different products. You get Microsoft products like Intune, which allows for certain deployments of Microsoft products. Workspace 1 will allow you to do any deployment on your devices directly from factory with factory provisioning, which means your image, your drivers, your company profile fully installed at factory and ready to deploy as soon as the end user gets his device. What he does is he will plug in his network cable, connect to his Wi-Fi, and within 5-10 minutes, his apps are up and running and he's ready to start working. So day one productivity. And the benefit of Dell's logistics is that we can deliver to anywhere in the country. So if you've got 5,000 locations, we can deliver to your employees wherever they are. And that's part of the deployment. But the real consideration is over the next 3 to 5 years of your warranty, you're going to want to have the best possible support. If you look right in the middle, 25% savings in IT costs, the real expense of owning a machine is not the upfront purchase price. It's the cost of actually owning it over the next 3 years. So products like Dell's Pro Support Warranty and Pro Support Plus allow you to have 24/7 on-site service with Dell's tier level 2 technicians. And these technicians are able to help you to stay productive 24/7 with tools that we offer through Pro Support like Tech Direct and Support Assist. You have the ability to even have your devices log their own calls with Dell, saving time. And then Dell finds
John, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I think this is where Dell's support model comes into its own. We've always had an on-site support model, and we have the ability to scale and provide after-sales support at people's homes. Now, there's some challenges at the moment in this current environment. A lot of people actually don't want our technicians to appear on site, so we've come up with a few working models where they can take them into the office and we'll repair them, or we can do some social distancing in terms of kind of like when you get a home delivery from Uber Eats, going back to Arthur's conversation. You can put the device down, they can repair it, and they can hand it back. So there are options like that, but we do have an on-site support, and it is national. And that is a huge differentiator in terms of the way that we support the users. And the other thing that we're seeing is a lot of a movement towards user support, and then users themselves helping themselves. Because in this new Windows 10 environment, and I've spoken about this for quite a while, never before have we been in a PC environment where Microsoft is able to update the operating system without intervention of the IT department or the users. And the challenge with that is when they do update Windows 10, it can often lead to complications. So you'll find that all of a sudden your sound drivers aren't working, or whatever those complications may be. And I might be jumping a little bit ahead, but there are a number of tools that we have around that support, like Support Assist, where little agents download and they check in constantly for updates that are being pushed from Microsoft onto Windows 10 and saying, oh, by the way, that will need a new sound driver. So let me go up to Dell's library, find the new sound driver, I'll download it for you, please give me permission to install, and then you're up and running. And you don't get those interruptions. But users themselves are able to control that, as opposed to, you know, going out to the ID department and saying to them, excuse me, but I need you to update my image, and then you go and do that with, or try and deploy it over a number of machines, or thousands or hundreds of machines, which are remote. But, you know, unified workspace is the thing that pulls that all together, and Workspace ONE, the solution that we're actually talking about here from VMware, allows you to do that and manage those images in a very dynamic environment. John, back to you.
And products like Dell Client Command Suite, which come at no cost to our commercial customers on Latitude and Optiplex and Precision devices, allow for the deployment of firmware BIOS drivers. So, you know, full control of these devices through IT to be able to keep them running at their best, which is also adds security. And then things like asset resale and recycle completes the PC lifecycle. With services, you know, many of our customers don't know that we actually offer a full asset collection and recycling service within South Africa. And if our customers have that storeroom full of IT kits that they need to get rid of, Dell can actually support them in having it ethically recycled, and a certificate can be issued to show that it has been, you know, through the asset resale and recycle process.
And we will do it on our competitors' products, and we will do it free of charge. So if you have old IT equipment that needs collecting and recycling, please contact Dell. We've got you can even go onto our website and log it, and they will come around and do the collection for you.
Great. And I've got a video now, Chris, just on the the configuration services, the deploy and integrate section, just to show our viewers the scale of the factory and what we can actually accomplish for our customers.
Sound is an issue, John.
No sound, eh?
No sound.
Okay, not sure why. There we go.
To simplify deployments, ensure consistency, and maximize uptime, look to Dell Deployment Services. We provide these services globally, starting with our major configuration centers in Tilburg, Netherlands, Sydney, Australia, and Nashville, Tennessee. At these facilities, configuration experts ensure your systems are pre-configured and ready to go out of the box. Your company receives fully functional systems shipped directly from the factory, ready for installation and use by your employees. For companies large and small, all new systems must be imaged to be ready for use by employees. Each Dell configuration center is optimized for imaging services. In Nashville alone, we have 21,000 square feet dedicated to burn racks, where we can image up to 3,700 systems simultaneously. In addition to imaging new systems, many of our customers prefer to change default BIOS settings. We can customize BIOS settings and even partition hard drives in our configuration centers. We can also install third-party hardware, such as additional RAM, graphics cards, and hard drives. Our asset tagging and reporting services simplify tracking and support of your new systems, from the day they leave our factory to the day they are retired. You can even personalize your systems with our laser etching service. Shipping labels enable each system to go from the factory to the desk without ever opening the box. And with asset reporting, you can get daily, weekly, or monthly reports to keep track of all your PC assets. Our enterprise product specialists can also rack and cable servers, storage, and networking products for you. If your facility cannot receive a fully populated rack, we can build one right at your site. With our logistics services, we can customize delivery to ensure your products arrive in a manner that meets your needs. For example, many of our customers' sites cannot accommodate a full standard pallet. so we can create smaller custom pallets. Even if your company has global offices, they ship separately to each site. If you don't need your systems immediately, they can be warehoused for up to 180 days, then configured just prior to shipping. This ensures only the most up-to-date image and configurations are applied. Imagine how much faster you could install new systems and get employees up and running if all these deployment tasks are performed before the new PCs arrive at your site. Dell Deployment Services enables you to spend less time on deployment and more time on business.
Great. I'm assuming the sound did come on. I did put it on.
It did come on. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, with these deployment services, we have a number of different products that we can actually assist our customers with. One that's quite exciting there, I think you may have seen the etching on the devices, being able to laser etch your company logo. And, with products at provisioning at factory, like VMware Workspace ONE, we can preload your company's image onto the device so that you have your ready-to-work experience on day one. Self-service empowerment is, with the single sign-on, Dell's actually has integrated quite a few of these technologies. I mean, we have the ability on our mobile phones to reset passwords and to access almost all of the applications that we have within our normal PCs. So I can be productive even if I'm sitting on my cell phone and not behind my PC. The products like VMware Workspace ONE help to keep inventory of the products that you have within your organization, when the warranties are going to expire, who's using which applications and who's not. And so a lot of intelligence through insights. And then, of course, making it secure through the cloud is probably the last key consideration that we need to discuss. But it takes us to optimize performance, Chris, and I just wanted to maybe spend a minute or two on this, where we're talking about the end user experience. Now, a new product that is launching on every single Latitude notebook, Optiplex desktop, and Precision workstation this year is going to be the Dell Optimizer. So this will be factory installed onto each device. And what it offers our customers is artificial intelligence or machine learning built right into the notebook. It's an application that manages 5 different technologies. The first one is Express Sign-In. This is the ability for the notebook to use the cameras and the infrared camera on the device to authenticate a user. So in the case of the 7400 2-in-1, which is our previous generation notebook that we launched, it has the ability for me to walk up to the device, it detects I'm in its vicinity, it automatically turns on the camera, authenticates me, and then logs me into Windows without having to touch the device. No fingerprint read, no password, no PIN. It authenticates me using Windows Hello. So it's less touch on the device. One of the technologies that's very exciting is Express Response. So this technology allows a user to select 5 applications that he uses on a daily basis. His absolute go-to apps. Could be Office, it could be Adobe Creative Cloud, any application. It learns the behavior of how you use that application, and then it will apply resources like memory, storage, processor, and creates a policy that will then enhance the performance of that application. Customers are getting between 5 and 10% better performance out of their applications. Express Connect is always looking for the strongest signal within your environment. It's always aware, and so it will continuously be jumping from router to router, finding the absolute best connectivity, keeping your voice over IP calls clear, and manages the actual data throughput as well by prioritizing things like voice over IP versus email download in the background. Express charges are our battery technologies. We had 80% charge within the first hour as standard on our previous gen notebooks. We've now added something called Express Charge Boost, which will charge your battery to 35% in just 20 minutes. And it's also got the intelligence built in now to monitor how you charge the battery. If you plugged in 24/7, it will trickle charge your battery. If you are a user who constantly unplugs their device, then it's going to express charge your battery. The benefit to you is that the battery physically will last longer over a period of a year, 2 years, because it's no longer just fast charging every single time, but it will intelligently trickle charge. And then, of course, like you said, intelligent audio, being able to select profiles based on the environment that you're in, whether in a noisy room with kids running around screaming, or if you're sort of more in a studio or office environment. So all these technologies will play throughout your workday, whether you're at the desk, whether you're at home, and the ability to, for example, typing on the keyboard, that sound of the keys being pressed, are able to be taken out using this technology.
So if you had a typical workday, in a scenario, how these technologies would be used, John, in terms of the express sign and response, connect and charges. The express sign in could be an interesting one with this, with the optimizer running. In the back end, it can look if your meeting is starting at 8:30 in the morning. It could boot up your machine for you. It could start the application, be it Teams or whichever application you're going to be using for the video conferencing. Make sure that that's optimized for your usage. Might find that you're in a different network and connect you to this better strength network for you, and allow you to actually start your meeting. So as you walk up to your device, you're ready to run. Which is, you talk about customer experience and the experience at home. Wouldn't that be great? I think one of the things that I've noticed during this lockdown is I sleep a lot later. It's a wonderful thing as I lie in bed and I'm a little bit lazier, and I often just leave it 3 minutes to get to the meeting. It's just quickly brush your teeth and go and sit down in front of the camera and hope that no one notices that you're in your pajamas. But the challenge is that you sometimes get there and it takes 4 to 5 minutes to boot up your machine, make sure that they're in the application and you're on, and then you're late and you're losing that time. But with this, the optimizer and the express sign and response connect, you are up and running and ready to go into that meeting immediately. If at one stage I need to go off, very seldom, and go meet in a coffee place and have a meeting with someone, and my device turns around and realizes that I'm actually down to 10% battery because I've been running through meetings or working in a different office and wasn't connected to power, I can quickly plug it in. And it can look and make sure that I've got at least 2 hours battery charge for that meeting that I need to go to. And the intelligent audio is one of the things that I really love about the newer technology is, I'm tired of carrying around these external speakers because it makes it difficult. It's another device that I have to carry on. I'd really like to just be able to carry on around my device. So having, as you said, the newer devices having top firing speakers where you can actually have this cone of sound around you and you don't actually disturb the people alongside you, but you're also able to run a video conference in a reasonably public space. Those are where these technologies actually make sense in terms of what we're developing and the things that we're trying to bring to make user experience at home and in this new environment a lot better. Happiness index, right? That would be working on.
Absolutely. Those top firing speakers are A grade, and I've got demos of these products, the new products, the 9510 at home, and the sound quality is absolutely phenomenal. It sounds just like an external speaker, but it's one less thing to carry in your bag with you. And then we've also got 4 microphones on that new product, 2 microphones listening to the ambient sound and 2 microphones are listening to voice. And so it's able to use the 2 mics to take out the external sounds, giving you putting you almost into a bubble. And as I said, this is now going to be pre-installed on all Latitude, Optiplex, and desktop, and is available to all of our commercial customers across the portfolio of commercial desktops, notebooks, and workstation. A quick look at that uninterrupted workflow. Now, this is the next 3 years after you've purchased a new machine of operating that device. What artificial intelligence, again, plays a key role in how we manage these devices. For our customers who take Pro Support and Pro Support Plus, they get something called Support Assist. It's a small application that is installed onto the device, and it's able to look for and download your latest drivers, firmware, BIOS, and keep your machine up to date. It scans your hardware and cleans files for you. It does performance tuning as well on the device, and it also optimizes your network. Now, all of these sit on the actual device itself. The notebook itself has the ability to monitor its own internal components, things like hard drive performance. If a memory DIMM is starting to get bad sectors, it can mark those bad sectors. And when that DIMM is at a point where it's going to fail, before failure or before you start getting those dreaded blue screens, it's able to then notify IT that this particular machine sitting in Cape Town, user Jonathan or Chris is about to have a hard drive or memory failure. And then it's able to log, with IT. IT can then use a product called TechDirect to log the call with Dell. So no more phone calls, 45 minutes on the call with the tech support department, simply going in and actually selecting the part that you're looking for, logging your own call. And the benefit is that when you take Pro Support Plus, this can become predictive and proactive. So the premium warranty, what it will allow is for the machine to actually do a phone home to Dell's technical support, log its own components. And in this case, the scenario would be that Dell would actually, the employee would get the machine would pick up an issue. Perhaps it's a hard drive, perhaps it's the memory. It will actually send that request to IT or directly to Dell computer. We would then dispatch the actual component or the part, contact the IT department to tell them that their machine is about to have a failure. Employees then got the opportunity to back up their parts before the technician arrives with the part. And at the end of the day, part is received, replaced, and the end user gets to is up and running with no failure.
John,
this is really a key technology.
Sorry, I just wanted to come in here with, we talk about transformation made real. And one of the examples, and it's as recent as 2 weeks ago, one of our larger customers, the CEO himself was having a lot of issues with Zoom calls. And he was finding that there was intermittent transmission of sound back and forwards with his speaker. And he couldn't quite work out what the issue was. We were told that we needed to replace the device, the hardware. We were pretty confident that it was a software issue. And spoke to the IT department about the fact that we were going to send a technician there and help load some drivers. The CEO himself was in the risk category, so over 55 years old, and said, look, I don't want anyone coming to my property. I'm a little bit nervous about them. The IT department were obviously under a lot of pressure because they need to get the CEO up and running, and he was getting frustrated about all the calls that he has to get on that weren't working. Eventually, we managed to talk him down off the edge of the cliff and say, well, let's just install this support assist for you and allow you to do some driver updates on it, which had been deactivated by the IT department when they loaded the image. We installed support assist, downloaded a new driver, and that was 2 weeks. A very senior executive who's actually not very tech savvy. But because it took over all the requirements for installing speakers, making sure that the drivers were up to date, there was very little interaction that was required from their side. So these are real environments. These are real scenarios that we're dealing with on a daily basis. And as users are required to be more savvy around supporting their devices and making sure they're updated, Support Assist is an amazing tool. And I would encourage anyone who has a Dell device to make sure that this is running on your customers' devices, Dell devices out there, because it will save you a lot of support time and a lot of frustration. Over to you, John.
Absolutely. Great. And then just wrapping up, is around the responsible retirement. Dell has set some pretty lofty 2030 goals that we want to, by 2030, for every single machine that we make, we want to recycle an equivalent device. We have one of the largest closed loop recycling programs in the world, where within our, as we take devices back, we will take them apart and try to reuse and rebuild after closed loop recycling. Products like our products like the XPS, 25% of their packaging comes from ocean-bound plastics that we've hauled out of the ocean. The other 75% is completely recycled. And our packaging in the future is going to be completely recycled packaging that can, again, in turn, be recycled. There will be no materials used that cannot be recycled. what was quite interesting is the closed loop hard drive magnets. And we've collected over 100 kilograms of hard drive magnets, which have now been remade into over 25,000 hard disk drives. Other products that we're doing and other initiatives is waterborne paint. So your new Latitude notebook comes with a new paint on the actual device, which is waterborne instead of chemical based paint. It's the same as what the motor industry is using, and it has less environmental effect. If you look at carbon fiber, we do carbon fiber reclamation from the aeronautical industry, and that's carbon fiber that would have been scrapped into landfills that has now been turned into the XPS 13, the beautiful palm rest that you have on the device. These materials look great, and they actually come from recycled materials that would have just been thrown out. So this is really a key initiative, and we've also just received across our 5000 series, 7000 series, and Optiplex devices EPEAT Gold certification across the entire portfolio. So these devices, and if EPEAT is a requirement within your organization, Dell has EPEAT Gold across pretty much the entire portfolio of commercial products that we have. And so, it's another initiative I really love, Chris, just before I finish up here, is the big diesel generators that are pushing soot into the air. Dell's actually been collecting the soot that comes out of these generators and converting it into ink that we're using to print on the boxes in factory. Just, to show a handful of the actual initiatives that we have in place that are going to help us to reach the 2030 goal to be, the most ethical and environmentally friendly company.
Thanks, John. I think that, we've probably concluded here, but one of the things that I would like to just leave the audience with is, we've spoken about a lot of concepts, we've spoken about a lot of initiatives, and every organization is at a certain path along this journey. What we've seen is a real condensed version of evolution in IT in the last 3 months, and I think it's here to stay, and we've got to come up with new ways of working with the technology that is in front of our users. So what we'd like to do with First Technologies is, very excited to offer an opportunity to do like a as is to be workshop to give you an idea of the kind of things that could be innovated. There's some very small little tweaks that could be done that really not going to cost the organization a lot of money, but will provide a lot better user experience for the users out there. And we encourage you to engage with us ourselves and your First Technologies account managers so that we can actually take you along that path and hopefully lead to a increase in the happiness index. So with that, I think we'll hand back to Faraz.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris and Jonathan. That was quite informative. Specifically, the part that I enjoyed in the end was the way you've evolved in terms of your business to become eco-friendly. We often forget about that in terms of looking at products and technologies in terms of customer requirements, how it fits into a business, as well as the overall experience of the users, etc. But we often forget about the other stuff outside. We're trying to save the planet and accommodate, disposing of assets, or just the way you build them in terms of eco-friendly stuff that you've incorporated into your tech. So that for me is quite a nice change. I think the whole world is looking towards changing that. EV, electric vehicles, are on the fast rise, and we yet have to see one. I've driven one, and I think I missed the sound of a nice, decent, loud motor, but that's just me. Bit of racing in the blood there. But anyway, having said that, I want to ask Arthur to join us as well. That was quite informative. And while Arthur is coming online, if I can just ask the audience, if you've got any more questions or any questions at all, please feel free to post them in the chat window, and we can address any of the speakers. If it's a general question, just put it out there. If it's a question specifically for a speaker, then please feel free to mention that speaker as well. And while we're waiting for questions, so we've spoken about the evolution, and there's a couple of things here that I noted during the presentations of everybody. I think the one thing that Arthur touched on is the healthcare, the concern, he raised various concerns for workers. and part of that was healthcare, childcare, education, etc. And then he led on to, you know, how can we help in that environment? In these areas we can help. I mean, tech can help, but it can't solve all problems, and that's where the difficulty lies in terms of healthcare for the masses or education for the masses. Even we've seen in the news for the last I think week or 2 weeks now, with the minister Angie debating whether schools are going to close, whether schools are going to stay open, whether, you know, the unions are pushing them around. I mean, it's a mind-boggling debate, and sometimes you just hit mute and you just want to hear the conclusion because you can't really control it. So in having said that, what I want to comment on is the 3 Ps you raised, which is prepare, prepare, and prepare. And where that is relevant is that we had no time to prepare for this pandemic. I mean, it hit us within weeks. We shut down, moved employees home. And I think where the word prepare comes in is not that immediacy of I'm falling off the cliff, now I needed a parachute, is where business owners needed to build that parachute already on in the process of evolving their business, the digital transformation roadmap, which we've been preaching for. And I'm using the word preaching, it sounds a bit heavy, but preaching for the last, I think, probably 5 to 10 years now, saying, guys, you got to evolve. You got to move to a software-based environment, integrate into your hardware. So you've got flexibility, mobility, agility. You got to let your workers work more flexible. I mean, with regards to tools, your software applications need to work. And some industries were stuck. Literally, they never evolved. And in not evolving, those are the ones I think who hit the cliff hard. And those that were partially evolved could float as opposed to properly land softly, but that floating meant they could survive. And I think it's a difficult foresight to have had. You know, hindsight is 20/20 vision, they say, but to see ahead of time that I needed to evolve. And this would have happened at some point, be it just the industry competitiveness where a market isn't ready and another market has overtaken you. And this has just accelerated that in a different manner, obviously. You mentioned Mr. Price, which is an interesting case study. And another one comes to mind for me. I see we've got a question. I'll attend to that now. Another one comes to mind for me is the one we did recently with Kuro Schools. Happens to be a Dell customer as well, by the way, guys. We've been on a roadmap with Kuro Schools for a few years now in terms of building a architecture that fits into the modern way of thinking in terms of software-based data centers, hybrid architectures, hybrid clouds, etc. And that was a very interesting roadmap for us because that has placed the school in a manner that they could accelerate their business. They could pivot their business or bring education to their students in a manner very, very quickly. And they were ready, they were poised. And I think the decisions they made a while ago helped. And for the audience, we've got a case study on that if you're interested. Please feel free to just give us a email, a ping, or a call, and we'll share that with you. So that just brings some interesting conversations there. Let me see what the question says. Okay. Okay, that's a question more for Dell, I guess. I'm going to read it out. I really like the support assist, but I just have one issue with the users that don't have admin rights. That application requires admin rights to load firmware updates. How does applications run with admin rights? Okay, that's a bit of a tricky question there. I'm not sure if we've got an answer in the audience. Otherwise, we'll have to get back to the customer, but I give it up to the Dell guys to see if they can respond.
Sure. Look, so Support Assist is the agent that runs on the end device. The quick answer is that your IT could use Tech Direct, which is the single pane of glass, which then can manage the entire infrastructure. So from Tech Direct, you could push firmware BIOS drivers to every single device in your Dell portfolio. And Tech Direct and Support Assist don't come in at an additional cost. It comes part of the Pro Support Plus or Pro Support warranty. But we do have, in-house technicians that can assist you in setting that up. We've just done it recently with a very large customer of ours, and they currently pushing out drivers of firmware BIOS to their entire fleet remotely.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Charles, I think we can loop back on that some other time after the call and just get you that feedback in a manner that you can implement. Thank you very much for that. I don't know if there's any other questions with regards to the changes. Jonathan mentioned something interesting with regards to this change of workers working from home. You mentioned an example of 1,000 users, and that is so true. Where we've seen organizations may have had 3 sites, 5 sites in South Africa and hundreds of users. Those individual users are now all sites remotely. and you have to support them. They've got connectivity issues, security issues, conferencing issues, and it brings across a major pain. And I think one of the things, Jonathan, that's noted, we often speak about standardization to make it easy for tech support, etc., etc. So the one part is standardization and having the right tools like Dell has to allow that management of the device. But I think the other part of it that you touched on is VDI, which takes away the difficulty in trying to manage the environment and again move it to a software layer. We all need hardware. You need to interface to something, right? But to simplify the management of the device from a user perspective and experience. So that for me is quite an interesting shift as well. Some of the stuff that was mentioned, the fact that you evolved in the units to have different sound inputs, video inputs, and quality from a experience for the user as we move into a conferencing world. I mean, that's the number one activity I think today. We find ourselves in meetings from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. staring at our screens. You know, it's becoming a bit of an overload of some sorts.
Yeah, so I was chatting to somebody yesterday. He says he feels like he has rugby ears from just wearing these headsets all day. You know, so if you can take the audio from a headset and have it coming out of your notebook, you know, it's great. Noise cancelling headsets. You know, so the ecosystem that we also supply to our users is also quite a key consideration. You know, just something simple as adding a second monitor. You know, we've done research that shows it can provide 21% better productivity to an end user. And if we talk about the happy factor again, you know, working on two monitors, it's just so much easier to do the job that I need to do. You know, I don't have to switch between windows and try and remember things and copy paste because I can display more information across two displays. So, you know, the ecosystem, just because we're working at home, it doesn't fall away. There's still a requirement for somebody to have dual monitors, to have a mouse keyboard externally to the notebook device. And, you know, if we can set our users to have that sort of environment, the happiness factor goes up, but also the productivity goes up.
So interesting. I read an article recently around this with regards to the World Economic Forum, and I went to go search that article this morning to find it again. And the chart, which I can share, obviously, is that is the biggest struggle for remote working. Workers working remotely, 20% of them, they experience difficulties with collaboration and communication. Now, that means maybe they don't have conferencing, but conferencing is one way to address that. And we've touched on that extensively in this discussion. The next 20%, the next highest pain point, by the way, is loneliness. We can't fix that, but maybe moving to a better conferencing experience can eliminate some of that stress around loneliness, because at least you can make contact with people and communicate. But it's not really a joking matter. I think the conference experience is becoming a big part of our life. You know, it's like quality of sound. If it's bad experience, you just can't have a meaningful meeting, discussion, or experience, and that's quite key overall. And also the stuff with the blue light that you mentioned. I mean, that's a big trend in terms of eliminating blue light, because overstimulus. I mean, we have got our mobile phones. It's the first thing we look at in the morning, and probably the last thing we look at night when we greet our partner. Right, so I mean, it's blue light's a big thing. But just by the way, a funny thing is, I spoke to a doctor a while ago who spoke about this blue light thing, and I was quite intrigued by it. And he said to me, you can get special spectacles. It's got a blue tint to help you when you're reading and watching TV and whatever. 1,600 rands for a plastic pair of spectacles with a blue lens. I promptly said no, thank you. But I could probably get an Amazon for $2.
Exactly, Alibaba.
Yeah.
And the thing is with this technology, you know, it's built right into the device. It's not like your mobile phone where you put on, you know, night view and it turns yellow to sort of take out that blue light. This is completely hardware based. We're eliminating the blue light that's being emitted from the display. And so you don't get color changes. Your accuracy stays the same, your color depth, your brightness. So it's quite a key technology. You know, same thing with the camera. We talked about, you know, the experience of having hardware backing up the camera. So you get this technology is called TMR. And what it does is it cleans up the image. So some of our competitors have got products out with full HD cameras. But if you put the image quality side by side, the HD cameras actually perform better with TMR technology. And then it also has a smaller picture, so it's less data being carried across. So, you know, for Zoom calls and you know, that sort of environment, it is actually still a better option.
Excellent.
If I could just mention, Feroz, the changing demands of remote working and video conferencing are going to influence a lot of sectors. So you mentioned the blue light filter on glasses, you can now have that tint put into your glasses. But there's a slight problem. When you wear those blue light tinted glasses in a video conference, all that the other people see is a reflection in your glasses. So it in fact creates greater distance between you and your audience. So protecting yourself from your screen, so to speak, means that you're also distancing yourself further from your audience. So that is also going to need a bit of reinvention, or Dell's technique of eliminating the blue light.
True, very true. I think it's trying to find a balance in things. So we've got a minute or two left before I ask Arthur to maybe contribute a little bit of a comment. I just want to remind the audience that there's the SMEC Coffee Maker up for the taking. If you please remember to respond to the survey that will come out from us and let us grant you that excellent gift. Arthur, on your side, I mean, from the overall presentation, discussion, is there anything else you want to add there or ask maybe from the Dell guys?
Well, first of all, I wanted to mention from what you were saying earlier, you said that people couldn't prepare for this, but at the same time, as you said, we've been preaching this message for the last decade. We've been telling people to prepare, not for a pandemic, but for the demands of digital transformation. So that then tells us that the tools or the capacity to prepare has always been there. The message to prepare has always been there. So now the question is, what do we prepare for next? And this is where the likes of Dell really come into the picture in a big way, because now we all know what it takes to prepare for remote working, but we're still not prepared, for example, for extended load shedding. And this demands laptops with extended battery life, for example, and other means of remaining connected, even when ESCOM is trying its damnedest to disconnect us. So load shedding is another area that we have to prepare for. What happens if there's extended disruption of supply chains, for example? How do we prepare for that? And perhaps that's something that the Dell guys can also suggest, Chris or Ryle. And I'm talking about both questions in terms of being able to work through extended load shedding and supply chain disruption.
I think I'll let John take the load shedding and I'll take the supply chain. I think we've got some interesting response on that one.
Well, I mean, the good news is that our devices have become very efficient. So we changed our display technology to something called a super low power panel. It uses 50% less energy than a previous generation display. With technologies like the ability to use artificial intelligence to manage how your battery is being charged, and being able to fast charge, trickle charge, on certain devices like our new 9510, we're getting 30 hours plus battery life. So in the real world, load shedding is generally a 4-hour window. It might become longer in the future, I don't know, but for now, your Dell will be able to take you through that window. What we do also offer is external battery packs. I carry one with me in my bag. I keep it charged 24/7. It has a Type-C connector, and when I plug it into my notebook, it gives me pretty much a full charge. So if I do by any chance forget to charge my notebook, I still have the ability to keep it running for a couple hours in addition to that. So efficiency becomes really important. Keeping it cool as well as another key aspect to efficiency.
Thanks. And I'll just quickly pick up the supply chain one. Sorry, Faraz, have we got enough time, or do we need to?
I think this will. Let's have this last discussion point, and then say thank you to everybody. So go ahead, please, Chris.
Thanks. So the birth of Dell, as most people have heard the story, was Michael Dell's dorm room where he was assembling PCs, and that's basically our DNA, is the supply chain and getting that right. One of the things that I was most proud of is our response during this lockdown in the way that we were able to get devices into the country. So typically we would be using commercial airlines, but we actually went as far as chartering planes and packing our devices on seats of planes that passengers weren't on and bringing them in. So we were able to keep the supply chain reasonably uninterrupted. And interesting, Arthur mentioned IDC earlier. They've come up with some provisional results, which has shown that in this really testing time, our supply chain held firm, and we were able to, interestingly enough, move forward significantly in market share just because we were able to supply. So our technology is still as good as it was, our competitors are still out there, but unfortunately they had an interruption and we managed to press home the advantage. And I think that's going to be a pattern that you see going forward, is if you sort out your supply and you make sure that you're adaptable and dynamic in this environment, you're going to take big leaps against your competition.
Fair enough. And Dell is very well known for that, by the way. As a partner of Dell, we obviously place a lot of orders on Dell factory, and the efficiency comes through. There's our challenge, but often it's an external factor like service. The COVID thing brought a huge factor into that in terms of customs and flights, like you said. I know one of our shipments was redirected by truck from Poland to Amsterdam, and then put onto a flight to accommodate delivery of that. So yeah, I think effort is being made. That's great. So yeah, I want to say thank you to everybody, Dell specifically for your contribution here and the assistance and support you've given us, to Arthur for also again sharing insightful market experiences, and to the audience for joining us today, Jolene for setting it up for us. Guys, just a reminder, that Smink coffee machine, my heart goes out to it. I can visualize in my kitchen, but I'd have to buy one, I think. So I'll negotiate with my wife on that. But having said that, it's nice to see the audience again on the list there. There's a few names I recognize that we have good relationships with and talk to regularly. So all the best, keep safe, wear the mask, please, and let's look after each other as best as we can. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you very much.